The other week, I made a post on my YouTube community page asking you guys to suggest me raw materials that you'd like to see me blend an accord with. So today, we're going to go through your most popular suggestions and we're going to try to blend an accord with those raw materials. Now, if you didn't see my post but you want to make suggestions in the future, then definitely subscribe to my channel, because if I make any community posts asking for suggestions for a future video, then it's much more likely to show up on your homepage on YouTube, and then you can go and vote for the thing you want to see. So let's dive in and see what you guys suggested. Okay, so looking at the post here, so surprisingly, the first 3 comments and the ones with loads of likes are for Castoreum, which is quite a niche raw material. It's not used that often, especially these days. So unless one of you just made a load of accounts and voted for it loads of times, I'm guessing you guys are way more interested in Castoreum than I thought. So we'll definitely do that in this video. And then next, the second most popular one was Ambrocenide. So I've got that raw material, we'll do that as well. And then after that, it wasn't quite so clear cut which ones were popular. We got quite a lot of votes for Osmanthus Absolute and cannabis. Now, cannabis isn't actually a raw material itself, it's a note. So we'd have to use a particular raw material to represent that. But I don't think I have something that would be completely good at representing that right now. And I also don't have Osmanthus Absolute, so I'll have to skip those ones for this video. But then after that, the next most popular suggestion, I think it was the black Agar Givco, because we've got 4 votes for that one, but we've also got another 2 votes for it down here. So what we'll go and do for our accord this time is black Agar Givco, which is essentially a representation for Oud, Ambrocenide, and Castoreum. Okay, so I've got these 3 raw materials here, and what I've done is I found an appropriate dilution, and then I've gone and dipped the scent strips into those. So we're going to go through each of them and smell them. So first we have the Castoreum. Now this one is diluted down to 1%. It's relatively strong, and 1% is an appropriate dilution. And what it smells like to me is it's a very kind of old-fashioned smell. I would say it reminds me of an old dusty office maybe from the 1920s, or I don't know. It's kind of, for me, it smells a bit vintage, a bit dusty, and it's got kind of a little bit of a warmth to it as well. And for what is an animalic raw material, because remember, this is a synthetic base designed to replicate that real Castoreum smell, which comes from the glands of beavers. For an animalic raw material, is actually a lot more pleasant than something like indole or something like civet, which smell a lot more, let's say, scatty. Now, I covered Castoreum in much greater detail in my video on leathery raw materials, so if you're interested in that, then head over to the link in the description below and watch that video. So the next one I've got here is Ambrocenide. Now, unlike the other 2, which are both synthetic bases designed to replicate some kind of natural smell, the Ambrocenide is a single molecule synthetic raw material. And again, I've got this diluted to 1% because it's very strong. Now, Ambrocenide, it essentially is a woody amber, and I would say potentially a woody super amber. So these are kind of woody amber smells. So they smell woody, often a little bit cedar leaning, a little bit dry and dusty, but they can be quite powerful, and that's what really sets them apart. And you can tell even at a 1% dilution, this Ambrocenide has a little bit of a harsh, kind of powerful facet. And it's often these woody super ambers that you can use in little trace amounts, especially in woody accords or incense accords or other things like that, to really boost them and give them some power. And this can be especially useful as some of the kind of woods or woody aroma chemicals, things like vertofix, on their own, they have a tendency sometimes to be a little bit subtle. So boosting them with a woody super amber, but there's other things you can use like nolimbanol or Ambermax 50, supplementing them with a little bit of that can be very useful. Now, finally, we have the black Agar Givco, and this is a base by Givaudan designed to replicate the smell of oud. And this one I've covered actually in detail in my video on oud bases. So if you're interested in that, definitely head over and check that video out. But essentially, it is what I think is a beautifully crafted base. Now, I don't think that it really truly accurately captures the smell of oud, but it's nonetheless a really, really nice accord, this beautiful blend of these kind of deep, dark, woody and oudy kind of notes, but it's also got this lovely kind of rich, sparkling top side to things, and it's got a bit of this blend essentially of things like cashmere, frankincense, and other dark woody notes designed to kind of give the impression of a lovely, let's say, incensey, kind of quite like nice, not too dirty, but quite, let's say, an agreeable and easy to use oud note. So it follows from these three that they actually happen to land in quite a similar olfactory territory. Namely, they all kind of are either woody or animalic in some sense. So this is already kind of making me think that we're probably going to be going for some kind of dark incense accord with these three raw materials. So let's now actually go and smell them all together, which is something I haven't done yet, and see how they work next to each other. So yeah, smelling these all together, they actually harmonize quite nicely. Actually, when you smell them together, they essentially make a natural accord, because I would say nothing sticks out too much. They actually kind of blend seamlessly into one smell. So that's a great starting point. I do think you get the kind of frankincense top part of the Black Agar Givco coming through a bit. You get the Castoreum, a kind of distinctive note coming through a little bit. And I would say you don't notice in this, you know, just with these three together, the Ambrocenide quite so much. However, I would say overall they're harmonizing quite nicely. So now it just comes to the choice of what we're going to add to this and which direction we want to push. For example, we could go in a sweeter direction, adding something like vanillin to make, let's say, more of a sweet and yummy kind of incense accord. We could really push the animalic side. For example, we could go to add something like a civet or some cashmere or some musks like muscadone to kind of add that dirty element. We could push it in a cleaner but still very dark direction. For example, we could go and add things like vetiver or oak wood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and take a look through my raw materials and pick some things out and see how I think they go alongside this accord. Right, so I've just had a quick look over my raw material shelves to get some ideas for what kind of things I think might go with the accord, but I haven't actually gone and smelled any of them yet. So now we're going to go over it with you guys and we're going to smell for the first time the ideas that I had and how they might go on with the accord. So the first one that caught my eye was the rectified birch tar. So birch tar is a very, very smoky smelling thing. If you want to ever get the smell of a bonfire, this is pretty much the closest thing you're going to get. So this one here is at 0.1% because this stuff is extremely strong, so it needs to be diluted. So let's have a smell and see what that's like with the accord. Yeah, so this is an extremely strong kind of wood smoke smell. And the result is quite interesting. So you definitely now get a strong kind of smoky element, which actually really shoots quite strongly through the accord. So it really kind of dominates the character a little bit. I would say it works overall. However, what it does is, out of the nature of the kind of chrysolic elements, so some of the molecules in the birch tar, it actually goes and adds this kind of leather or Russian leather, kind of smoky leather smell. And that kind of, you know, in combination with the Castoreum, because they both have leather elements to them, it really brings out a leathery aspect to the accord. So if we want to push the accord in a leathery direction, then this would certainly be a good move. However, I'm not too sure that that's actually where I want to go with it. I kind of feel like a little bit more of an incense direction could work a bit better. So we'll leave that and see. Right, so the next two things I've got here are clearwood and cinnamon absolute. So clearwood is essentially, let's say, it's kind of a clean, earthy smell. You can think of it like a very clean version of patchouli. So I've got this diluted at 10% here. This one is very much a base note. And it's not super strong, but it's kind of the clean, earthy aspect of patchouli if you kind of isolated that on its own. And then we've got cinnamon absolute, and this one is very unusual actually. This one I've just got a sample of. It was something I was thinking about stocking over at the Fragrance Foundry, potentially using in a perfume, but I haven't really got that far with it yet. But essentially what it smells like is a very rich kind of intricate cinnamon smell. Reminds me a little bit of once when I made a cinnamon tincture back in my early days of perfumery. Now the downside of this stuff is it's not the strongest stuff. So cinnamon bark essential oil is a lot more common and that projects a bit more, it's more of a top note. But this is a little bit more subtle, it's more of a mid note. However, the smell it's actually got is very nice. It's a very nice kind of deep, complex cinnamon smell. And out of nature of our incense accord, I thought that might go with it. So if I go and take that cinnamon, for now we're leaving the clear wood just because that's more of a base note. It's quite subtle, so I want to leave the ethanol to evaporate. So we'll do the cinnamon while we wait for that. But the cinnamon absolute with the accord, I think that's quite nice. So it adds this kind of cinnamon aspect, which really combines nicely with the incense parts, especially the black Agar Givco. And it really sweetens up the accord a little bit. Or maybe it doesn't make it sweet as in a sickly sweetness, but let's say it sweetens up kind of the spicy aspects, if that really makes sense. It might just because there's an association with cinnamon with things like cinnamon buns. But here we've got kind of the spice element without the sweet vanilla, which usually accompanies it. And I have to say, I think that works quite well because it creates kind of, let's say, a dry, sweet kind of woody smell in a sense. Not a proper gourmand sweetness. It just adds this nice kind of sparkle. And, you know, cinnamon goes really nicely in incense accord. So for sure, I think this could have a place in this accord. Now, on the other hand, I've got the clear wood here. So the clear wood is this kind of earthy, maybe slightly resinous, clean patchouli smell. And I would say overall, this doesn't really add too much to the accord. Now, to be fair, because we've only recently dipped these and these things are a bit more powerful, it's probably the kind of thing that will only come out properly in the bass note. So if we're constructing a bass note accord, then we'd want to let everything dry down properly and see how it affected it then. But on the face of it, right now, you know, with or without this, it's not making too much of a difference. So I think for now, we're going to leave out the clear wood. Okay, so the next thing I've got here is Givco wood oil. And this is a woody raw material, but it's very, very smoky. Almost a little bit of like, you know when you have a smoked food, like smoked cheese or smoked meats or something like that? It's kind of got that kind of smoked smell, almost like barbecue sauce kind of smell. And this one, I thought it's kind of warm. It's like a warm, a little bit dark, woody smell. And it's nowhere near as pungent and as kind of strong, let's say, actual burning wood, kind of that leathery, acrid smell that the cade or the birch tar have. But this is a lot more of a kind of warm barbecued wood smell. So I just thought maybe in terms of our incense, you know, with our warm cinnamon potentially or something like that, then this might fit nicely. So what does it smell like with the rest of the accord? Well, it's very strong, so far it dominates a little. Yeah, I think it works okay. It works okay, but it does just kind of add this, almost like this kind of bacon, smoked bacon smell to it. I don't know, it doesn't really quite add the incense element that I'd hoped. Okay, so next I have Isoe Super here at 10%. And a lot of people see Isoe Super as simply this thing that you shove in to make perfumes work. But you need to remember what Isoe Super actually is a nice diffusive radiant woody amber. And it's not quite as pungent as something like your Ambrocenide. So this actually usually lends itself to finding or providing a nice kind of soft base, especially for things like these woody amber or incense accords. So what does that smell like with the other things? Yeah, I think that smells quite nice. It doesn't change the character of the accord too much, but it rounds off the edges a little bit, and it just provides kind of a subtle softness, a little bit of warmth, and it's nice. So I think we'll have that in the accord. All right, so next we have Jasmine Absolute at 1%. And I often find when you have a lot of woody things together, or incensey things, you can easily get this kind of thick, dry woodiness, and sometimes it needs a little bit of space to breathe. So sometimes a little bit of a floral thing can help, and I find personally I really like how jasmine kind of works as an incense theme. So jasmine on its own is this kind of lovely, kind of sweet, a little bit dark floral scent. So interesting, it does blend nicely. I think it blends well. It's a tricky one because actually at the moment this jasmine kind of, let's say it overtakes, it dominates a bit the smell that we've already got. But I do think it sits there quite nicely in the backdrop. So this is potentially something we could add in a trace amount just to add a little bit of complexity. and to help it breathe. But if we did that, I think we'd only want to add a small amount so that the focus on the accord remains that of kind of an incense accord rather than, you know, something that is more floral and jasmine leaning. I think it definitely adds something, and it kind of adds this kind of almost dark tea element to it. And I think that's what I like about it. It's kind of the dark tea for me, that kind of goes well with the darker bits of the oud and the whole kind of incense theme. But yeah, I think maybe a little bit of this just in a small amount. Okay, so next we have Cephalus, which is one of my favorite kind of, let's say, woody amber notes. Actually, one of my favorite woody notes, full stop, I would say. And this is a lovely kind of top to mid note, and it's a very bright, quite sweet. It's a nice resinous smelling woody smell. I just think it's so, so nice. So we'll see what that smells like with everything else. And I think that works quite well. And Cephalus is quite strong though, and it has a tendency to, you know, dominate because it projects a bit more. It's more of a top to mid, whereas the other things are a bit more mid to bass, which means, you know, the Cephalus has a tendency to shout a bit louder. I like it and I think it fits nicely, but I would want to add a pretty small amount just to make sure that, you know, the rest of the accord still kind of shines through. All right, next then, the final thing that I thought maybe would work well. And by the way, this is not to say only these things I thought could work well. In fact, there are a lot more things that I think would work well in this kind of accord. But when you're doing this, you know, picking your raw materials, a lot of it I think depends on your mood in the given day. It depends on what you've done before, and if you want to do something tried and tested, if you want to do something new, which in this case, you know, I've had other notes which I've done in this kind of incense accord before, which I've tested out, and some of them I quite liked, but I haven't necessarily tested them out again today because, you know, I'm looking to do something new, and that's how you kind of learn in perfumery. You try different things to learn more and more. So I've kind of, you know, this whole thing is, there's no right or wrong on what to pick is what I'm trying to say. I'm just basically picking what I feel like today. So I looked at the oak moss and I thought, haven't used that in a while. That's kind of can be a darker kind of bass note. I wonder if that would work. So we'll see. Oh, wow, that is really nice. Okay. Yeah, to be honest, I wasn't so sure about that. But yeah, out of all the things I've smelled, that is really interesting. So oak moss on its own, if you don't already know, it's almost, I would say, animalic leaning. It's not actually an animalic smell, but it's got this kind of, it's got like a tanginess to it. It's got tangy kind of woody forest floor elements, a little bit like pine absolute or cypress absolute. But it's also kind of got its own unique kind of a little bit of sweetness. And this is kind of a little bit like, I would feel like, imagine you're in like a museum about kind of the ancient forest or something. It's a very interesting kind of, you know, old-fashioned smell, and I think that's what goes well with the Castoreum. Because remember I said it reminded me a little bit of a 1920s office. Oak moss has definitely got this kind of vintage, kind of quite rich smell to it. But then, and it's got these kind of forest things as well. I don't know, but it goes nicely with everything else. So I actually think we could use a pretty reasonable amount of oak moss in this accord. So then, where does that leave us? Going by everything else, I think we won't bother with the birch tar because we found other stuff we like more. We won't bother with the clearwood, and we won't bother with the guaiacol, or the guaiac wood, sorry, guaiacol is something else. So we're going to take, I think, just a little bit of the cinnamon absolute, have that as like an accessory element. We'll take a fair amount of Ice Super, but having a fair amount of that, because it's, you know, this kind of soft padding thing, it shouldn't dominate the smell as such. We'll take a little bit of jasmine, just again, as a bit of an accessory element. And we'll take just a little bit of Cephalus. And then we'll take our oak moss absolute, and I think this will be like a key player in the accord. I will kind of want to push this essentially as the main kind of like, let's say, creative idea that's going to be blending with the other stuff. Is kind of, it's going to be this like oak mossy deep incense. So it's going to be a combination of those with the oak moss, and then these other things are just going to be put in as supporting elements, and hopefully they'll come out well. Now, if I was doing this for a project or something, you know, I was interested in this idea quite seriously for a perfume, I'd probably take the time to go through and make up separate accords between the elements and slowly build them up. However, because we're just doing a fun little sketch, I'm just going to come up and propose a formula, smell it, see what it's like, and, you know, maybe do a rebalancing step if there's something obvious that needs redoing. So let's jump into formula and go and come up with that formula. Okay, so back at the desk, and I've got formula open here, so let's jump in. Now I've gone and added the raw materials, so we've got the 6 from the original accord up here, and then those 5 new additions which we're going to add, and I've come up with some proportions that I want to test out. Now the one key thing you'll notice is that the oak moss is in red, which in formula means it's over the IFRA limit, because for this version of oak moss, even though it's IFRA compliant, it still has an IFRA limit, and in this case it's 0.35%. So that means this is approximately 6 times over the limit, the way I've put it into the formula. But the idea here is that we're making an accord. So you would not be using this at full strength in your final perfume. If we were making a perfume, then yes, we'd have to get the oak moss down to be IFRA compliant. But in this case, I'm saying, well, say you've got a 20% eau de parfum. Well, if this accord was about 1/6 of your total perfume, then that compensates for us going 6 times over the limit of oak moss. Obviously, you would want to expand that out and check it in a final perfume. But what I'm trying to say is, for now, I don't mind too much that we're going to go, you know, that high with the oak moss. That said, we probably don't want to go too much higher than that. Otherwise, we're making an accord that can only be used in tiny amounts, which there isn't much point in. Another way we could deal with this is to try to make our own oak moss accord. So, for example, we could use a little bit of oak moss. Then we could use something like Pine Absolute, which I feel has, you know, a lot of shared elements with oak moss, and then something like Veramoss, which is a big natural component. You know, but for now, we're not making a serious perfume out of this, right? So, you know, if I was trying to make this into a perfume for a project, you know, we'd deal with that later down the line. So for now, I've said, look, well, Black Agar Givco, this is fairly strong, as so is the Ice Super and the oak moss. Oak moss is strong on its own, but I like how that interacts with the other things, so I want that to feature in the accord. Ice Super, on the other hand, is this kind of soft thing that sits nice in the background, so we can use high amounts of that. We can use high amounts of that without it really dominating. In fact, it should go to nicely round out everything else. And then the Black Agar, as kind of, let's say, I would say compared to the other 2 things in our core accord, the Castoreum and the Ambrocenide, this is actually weaker. So we can kind of afford to, let's say, use a larger amount, especially as we're going in the incense direction with the accord, which I think should work quite nicely, and that really provides a lot of that incense character. So then I've added, you know, with these things like the Castoreum and the Ambrocenide, it's hard to really guess actually what amounts would be a good amount. So I've kind of gone and penned in these as what I thought, you know, would be a decent guess. And then I tried to go quite low on those other additions that we made. So the cinnamon, the jasmine, and the Cephalus, because those things I really wanted to add just as kind of an accessory element. So I wanted to add a little touch of them to hopefully add a bit of color, but I don't really want them to dominate the smell of the accord. I'm hoping that they just blend nicely into the background and create this kind of nice, unique smell that you can't really pick out. So I'm going to try this as a formula. Let's weigh it out and see what it smells like. Okay, so I've got the accord here. Let's do the first impressions. So immediately, before I actually go to smell it, a good thing to do is to notice, you know, the smell that's coming out at you, because, you know, you notice what actually projects. And I think just from that, it's a fairly, you know, it's not too bad a smell. It does give me a little bit of an old-fashioned, but also kind of incense vibes. And I think you can kind of smell that jasmine giving it a bit of lift as well. So I think that was worthwhile, even though we used a small amount. Okay, so, yeah, this is quite nice actually. Not too bad at all. In terms of an incense theme, I'd say this definitely fits well into that category. And I really think the woody side of it especially has come together really nicely. So all of the woody parts of that Black Agar Givco and the kind of the Ice Super providing a softness, the more kind of harsher in your face part from the Ambrocenide, that has all really come together nicely, and a little bit of warmth from the cinnamon. So you've got a really nice woody accord in here. But then you've got just little inflections from the cinnamon, little tiny bits from the jasmine that are barely noticeable unless you know they're there, but they really add something you know, a bit of sparkle to it and make it a bit special rather than your average kind of plain woody accord. And I think that's really what an incense accord is. It's when you have, you know, a basic woody accord, but you add these extra little facets to it to make it special. So you've got these nice spicy notes. You've got the frankincense from the Black Agar Givco, bit of cinnamon. I just want to keep smelling it, to be honest. I quite like it. Yeah. And then, so you have got the kind of Castoreum. And now I'm not sure if we actually need the Castoreum. Obviously we chose to use the Castoreum because of the premise of the video. I think the Castoreum does fine in there, but what it does is it does push it a little bit more in the kind of vintage direction, let's say, in the way it smells. It just makes it smell a little bit more old-fashioned, which is, you know, not necessarily good or a bad thing. I think you could have this accord either way, with or without it, and depending on your taste, that would define which one you'd prefer. I think it's just a matter of taste, but overall I really like this, actually. I mean, personally, I'm a really big fan of cinnamon. I do personally think that cinnamon is one of the kind of magic keys to an incense accord. So this has gone down nicely here. I like how jasmine works in it as well. The Cephalus, you don't actually particularly notice it, but you know, so if you really wanted to test if it's actually doing anything or not, you'd have to try it with and without. But so far, I like what we've got. So I would imagine it's probably doing something good. What about the oak moss? So I can't actually smell that as much as I would have liked, which is a shame because we can't really increase it more. I kind of think that if we'd have decreased the Castoreum a little bit and increased the oak moss, that would probably be a little bit more to my taste. But realistically, I don't think we really can increase the oak moss. The only thing I can think that we could do is actually add cypress absolute in addition to the oak moss, potentially a little bit of Veramos as well, and see how it goes. But that said, I quite like this accord. I'm not going to lie, it's better than some of the other ones I've made for some of the other videos. And it's definitely a nice theme, like a nice starting point. So if you're interested in exploring incense accords, then no reason not to try this one. Okay, so we've left it another 20 minutes or so just to dry down a little bit. And what do we think? So it's definitely an old-fashioned smell, but overall it's got this kind of dusty woodiness with kind of just a very subtle hint of cinnamon, which I like a lot. And yeah, overall, well, what it is it's an idea. And now I'm not going to go and rebalance this because I think even if I did that, you know, I kind of would already know what I'm roughly going to get out of it. It's not going to be too far off. And when I do a little sketch like this, what I quite like to do is have that as an idea, especially when I'm exploring a topic. So for example, I've got my perfumes for my perfume brand here. One of the perfumes I'm hoping to make at some time in the next year or two is a nice kind of incense perfume. And I'm definitely thinking about doing something with similar ideas, especially something with maybe a little bit of cinnamon in. Who knows, maybe there'll be a bit of jasmine or something else. I'm not quite sure yet. So having an experiment, let's say, like this, where I've done a little sketch, is nice because, you know, if I go and make a different take on the incense theme, you know, once every couple of months, when I finally get around to making that perfume, I'll have essentially a bank of ideas and I can go and look through them and I can think, you know, which elements are common across the ones I like, look at it like that, and then that gives me a really good starting point for a cinnamon perfume. So making an accord like this, you know, it doesn't have to always evolve into a full perfume necessarily straight away. Sometimes it's just nice, I think, to build up these sketches. And when you're doing that, you don't necessarily have to go and, you know, refine everything to be perfect, because what the idea here is this rough combination, right? We've got Castoreum, a kind of Black Agar Givco, woody elements, and bits of oak moss, a little touch of kind of cinnamon. And that's one idea. And when I go to look at other incense notes, you know, there's other ideas you can try. What about a rose style of incense? Because a lot of incenses actually have things like rose in or frangipani instead of jasmine. And then you've got other woods as well, like sandalwood is a very common one that's used in incense. So I like having little ideas like this. And I also think this kind of exercise is something that's very doable. So if you are there at home and you're stuck for ideas, or actually maybe making a full perfume is a bit daunting, then a little sketching exercise like this is something I think is a lot more enjoyable because there's less pressure. You're just trying something, seeing what happens, and it's definitely something that you can do in the morning. So if you've, say, got a Saturday or a Sunday morning and that's your time you can do your perfumery, then you could do one of those in that time and learn a bit about the raw materials that you're using in that blend. So was it successful? Yeah. So there you have it. An accord made using Castoreum, Black Agar, Givco, and Ambrocenide, building upon our kind of incense theme. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did like it, definitely like and subscribe, and actually let me know down in the comments if you like this kind of quick sketching video, because I could certainly go and do more like this, but only if you enjoy them, because if you don't, then, you know, let me know and I'll do something else. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time with another video.